The air was thick with the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and something darker, something that clung to the back of my throat as I pressed myself closer. Clara's breath came in soft, uneven gasps, her fingers digging into my shoulders as if anchoring herself against a storm. My hands traced the curve of her spine, her skin burning beneath my touch. And in that moment, the world beyond the hotel room ceased to exist. It was wrong. God, I knew it was wrong. But the ache in my chest, the hunger that had gnawed at me for years, drowned out every whisper of conscience. I wanted her, not just her body, but the fleeting illusion of being seen, of mattering to someone. And as our bodies moved together, a rhythm both desperate and deliberate, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. But even then, in the heat of it all, a shadow lingered, the weight of what we'd done, what I'd allowed myself to become. It started innocently enough, or so I told myself. A business trip to Chicago, a contract worth millions, and Clara, my boss, radiant and untouchable, leading the charge. I was just Ethan, the junior associate, diligent and unremarkable, always a step behind her commanding presence. She was 38, sharp as a blade, with eyes that could unravel you in seconds. I was 29, eager to prove myself, though I carried the quiet loneliness of someone who'd spent too long chasing ambition over connection. We'd spent weeks preparing for this deal, late nights in the office blurring into early mornings, her voice a steady anchor through the chaos. When the client finally signed, the relief was electric. Clara's smile lit up the room, and for the first time, I felt like I was part of something bigger. "Let's celebrate," she'd said, her voice lighter than I'd ever heard. "Just one drink." We found a bar near the hotel, a dimly lit place with jazz humming in the background. One beer became two, then three, and soon Clara's laughter was softer, her guard slipping. I noticed the way her fingers lingered on the glass, the faint tremble in her hands. She talked about the deal, then about nothing at all, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Do you ever feel like you're just empty?" Her eyes met mine, and I saw something raw, something I hadn't expected. Loneliness, stark and unguarded. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe it was her, leaning closer, her breath warm against my cheek. Maybe it was me, my hand brushing hers, a spark igniting something reckless. We stumbled back to her hotel room, the elevator ride a blur of stolen glances and racing pulses. The door clicked shut behind us, and then it was just her and me, the weight of our choices pressing down like the humid Chicago night. Her lips found mine, tentative at first, then hungry, and I was lost in the heat of her, the way her body arched against mine, soft and unyielding all at once. Every touch was a confession, every sigh a betrayal. I knew she was married, that I was crossing a line I could never uncross. But the need to feel something, anything, overpowered the guilt. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, her head resting on my chest, her breathing slow and steady. The room was silent, but my mind screamed. What had I done? I stared at the ceiling, the glow of the city filtering through the curtains, and felt the first tendrils of shame coil around my heart. Clara stirred, her fingers tracing lazy circles on my arm, and murmured, "This doesn't change anything, Ethan." But it did. It changed everything. The next morning, she was all business again, her suit pristine, her voice clipped as we reviewed the contract details. I tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to her hands, remembering how they'd felt against my skin. She caught me staring once, and for a moment, her expression softened. a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. We didn't talk about it. Not then, not ever. But the memory of that night burned in me, a secret I carried like a wound. Days turned into weeks, and the trip stretched on. More meetings, more cities, more nights where the line between colleague and lover blurred. Clara was careful, always professional in public, but in the quiet moments, when it was just us, she'd let her guard down. A brush of her hand against mine in the elevator, a look that lingered too long over dinner. Each time, I told myself I'd stop, that I'd walk away before it went further. But the truth was, I didn't want to. I craved her, her touch, her attention, the way she made me feel like I was more than just a cog in the machine. And she craved me too, or at least the escape I offered from whatever emptiness haunted her. One night in Seattle, after a long day of negotiations, we found ourselves alone in her suite again. The rain pounded against the windows, a steady drumbeat that matched the rhythm of my pulse. She poured us both a glass of wine, her movements slow, deliberate. "You don't have to stay," she said, but her eyes told a different story. I crossed the room in 3 steps, my hands finding her waist, pulling her close. Her lips were soft, her breath hot, and as we sank into each other, I felt that same intoxicating mix of desire and dread. Our bodies moved like they'd learned each other by heart, a dance of need and surrender. Her skin was a map I traced with reverence, her sighs a language only I understood. But even as I lost myself in her, the guilt gnawed at me, a quiet voice reminding me of the lives we were betraying. Hers, mine, her husband's. When it was over, she lay beside me, her hair spilling across the pillow like ink. I wanted to ask her why she let this happen, why she chose me, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I listened to her breathing, steady and calm, and wondered how long we could keep this secret, how long before it consumed us both. The rain in Seattle had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, clinging to my skin as we left the hotel the next morning. Clara walked ahead, her heels clicking against the pavement, her posture as composed as ever. I followed, my briefcase in hand, my mind a tangle of last night's heat and the cold reality of daylight. Her scent lingered on me, faint but undeniable, a reminder of how far I'd fallen. I told myself it was just once more, that I could pull back, reclaim the man I used to be. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. The truth was, I didn't want to stop. Not when her touch made me feel like I was burning alive. Not when her eyes held a hunger that mirrored my own. Our days were filled with meetings, presentations, the hum of corporate life. Clara was a force, confident, precise, commanding every room we entered. I played my part, the diligent associate, nodding at the right moments, chiming in with data when needed. But beneath the surface, something simmered. A glance across the conference table, her foot brushing mine under the desk, the barest hint of a smile when no one else was looking. Each moment was a spark, igniting the anticipation of what would come later, when the world fell away and it was just us. In Denver, it happened again. We'd closed another deal, smaller but no less significant, and the team went out to celebrate. Clara and I stayed behind, claiming we needed to prep for the next day. The lie came easily, too easily. Back in her room, the air was charged, the silence between us thick with unspoken need. She stood by the window, the city lights casting shadows across her face, and I watched her, my heart pounding. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "come here." I crossed the room, my hands trembling as I reached for her. Her lips met mine, fierce and unyielding, and we stumbled toward the bed, our movements urgent, as if time itself were chasing us. Her skin was warm, her body yielding, yet demanding, and as I moved with her, I felt that same reckless thrill, the kind that made my blood sing even as it tore me apart. Her fingers traced the lines of my back, her breath hot against my ear, and every touch was a collision, a merging of two souls too broken to resist. We moved together, a rhythm that was both chaos and precision, our bodies speaking what our words never could. Her sighs were soft, then sharp, each one pulling me deeper into the abyss. I wanted to lose myself in her, to forget the world outside. But the guilt was always there, a shadow that grew darker with every stolen moment. Afterward, we lay in silence, her head on my chest, my fingers threading through her hair. I wanted to hold on to this, to pretend it could last, but the weight of our choices pressed down on me. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, more to myself than to her. She didn't respond, but her hand tightened on mine, a silent plea, or maybe a warning. I didn't know which. The pattern repeated itself, city after city, hotel after hotel. In San Francisco, it was a late-night meeting that turned into something else, her hands pulling me close as we stood by the desk, papers scattering to the floor. In Boston, it was a shared taxi ride back to the hotel, her thigh pressed against mine, the tension building until we barely made it to her room. Each time, I told myself it would be the last, that I'd find the strength to walk away. But the truth was, I was addicted, not just to her body, but to the way she made me feel, alive, wanted, seen. And Clara, with her guarded smiles and fleeting moments of vulnerability, seemed just as trapped, her loneliness a mirror to my own. One night in Miami, the heat was unbearable, the air conditioning barely keeping up. We'd spent the day in back-to-back meetings, and by evening, exhaustion had frayed our edges. Dinner was quiet, the team dispersed early, and Clara and I ended up alone in the hotel bar. She ordered a whiskey, her fingers tracing the rim of the glass, and I watched her, my pulse quickening. "You're staring," she said, her voice teasing but soft. I didn't deny it. We didn't make it to her room that time. The elevator was empty, and as the doors closed, she pressed herself against me, her lips finding mine in a kiss that was all fire and desperation. My hands slid under her blouse, her skin searing under my touch, and we moved together, the confined space amplifying every sensation. The ding of the elevator snapped us back, and we stumbled out, laughing breathlessly. But the thrill of almost being caught lingered, a dangerous edge to our secret. Back in her room, we shed the last of our restraint. Her body arched beneath me, her breath a cadence that matched the pounding of my heart. Every touch was electric, every movement a confession of how much we needed this, needed each other. But as we lay there afterward, the familiar guilt crept in, sharper this time. I thought of her husband, a man I'd never met but whose existence haunted me. I thought of my own life, the principles I'd once held dear, now crumbling under the weight of my desires. "What are we doing, Clara?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She turned to me, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment I thought she'd answer. But she only kissed me, soft and slow, and I let myself fall into it, knowing I was damning us both. The next morning, she was gone before I woke, a note on the pillow. "Meeting at 8. Don't be late." I stared at it, the crisp handwriting a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. I wanted to believe we could keep this contained, that no one would ever know. But deep down, I felt the truth. Secrets like ours had a way of unraveling, And when they did, there'd be no going back. The days bled into one another, a blur of airports and conference rooms, but the nights, those were sharp, vivid, etched into my soul with a precision that both thrilled and tormented me. Clara and I had become something unspoken, a secret woven into the fabric of our routine. By day, we were professionals, our interactions clipped and careful. But when the world turned quiet, we were something else entirely, two people clinging to each other in a storm of our own making. Each encounter was bolder, hungrier, as if we were racing against an invisible clock, desperate to steal every moment before it all came crashing down. And yet, I knew it was wrong. But the deeper we sank, the harder it was to care. In Atlanta, it was a rooftop bar, the city sprawling beneath us, lights flickering like stars. The team had gone back to the hotel, but Clara and I stayed, the humid air wrapping around us like a second skin. She leaned against the railing, her silhouette framed by the skyline, and I couldn't look away. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice low, teasing. I didn't answer, just closed the distance between us, my hand grazing her waist. Her breath hitched, and then she was kissing me, fierce and unapologetic, her body pressed against mine. We barely made it to her room, the elevator ride a haze of whispered promises and stolen touches. The door clicked shut, and we were lost again, our bodies colliding with a desperation that bordered on violence. Her hands were everywhere, pulling me closer, her sighs a symphony that drowned out the world. My lips traced the curve of her neck, her skin tasting of salt and heat. And as we moved together, it was like we were trying to outrun the guilt that always followed. Her fingers dug into my shoulders, her breath hot against my ear, and I felt that familiar rush, the kind that made me forget who I was supposed to be. But afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, the weight of it all settled in. I stared at the ceiling, her head resting on my chest, and wondered how I'd let it come to this. "You're thinking too much," she murmured, her voice sleepy, intimate. I wanted to tell her everything, how I hated myself for this, how I couldn't stop, how I was terrified of losing her. But I didn't. I just held her closer, knowing I was digging my own grave. Clara started opening up in those quiet moments, her guard slipping like a veil. One night in Dallas, as we lay in the dark, she talked about her marriage, not with anger, but with a hollow kind of sadness. "He doesn't see me anymore," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not the way you do." Her words hit me like a punch, not because I pitied her, but because they echoed my own emptiness. I'd spent years chasing a career, a life, only to realize I had no one to share it with. Clara filled that void, but at what cost? I wanted to be her savior, to fix the broken pieces she'd shown me, but I was just as lost, just as complicit. Our encounters grew reckless. In Phoenix, it was a supply closet during a break in negotiations, her lips on mine before I could protest, her hands deft and urgent. The risk of being caught only fueled the fire, our bodies moving in a frantic rhythm, the world outside reduced to a hum. In New Orleans, it was a jazz club, the music pulsing through us as we slipped away to a dark corner, her body swaying against mine, our breaths mingling in the shadows. Each time I told myself I'd end it, that I'd find the strength to walk away. But the truth was, I thrived on the danger, the forbidden thrill of her touch, the way she made me feel like I was more than just a name on an org chart. But the guilt was relentless, a shadow that grew darker with every line we crossed. I started seeing accusations in the eyes of our colleagues, though I knew it was my own paranoia. At night, I'd lie awake, Clara's breathing steady beside me, and imagine her husband finding out. Imagine the fallout, the shame, the ruin. I'd think of my parents, their quiet pride in me, and how I'd betrayed everything they'd taught me. The man I saw in the mirror wasn't the one I'd meant to become, but I couldn't stop. Not when her touch was the only thing that felt real. One night in Las Vegas, the stakes felt higher, the air electric with something I couldn't name. We'd been drinking, laughing too loudly at a casino bar, and when we stumbled back to her suite, the mood shifted. She pushed me against the wall, her kiss bruising, her hands tearing at my shirt. We didn't make it to the bed, our bodies crashing together on the floor, a tangle of limbs and need. Her nails raked down my back, her breath a ragged chant, and I matched her intensity, lost in the heat of her, the pulse of our connection. It was raw, unfiltered, a moment where nothing else existed. Not the world, not the consequences, just us. But when it was over, she didn't stay close. She stood, her silhouette stark against the neon glow outside, and said, "We're going to hell for this, Ethan." Her voice was flat, resigned, and it cut deeper than any accusation. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her sleep, and felt the walls closing in. The secret was a weight I could barely carry, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it crushed us. I thought about ending it, about telling her we had to stop, but the thought of losing her, of going back to the emptiness I'd known before, was unbearable. I was trapped, caught between the man I wanted to be and the one I'd become, and I had no idea how to find my way out. The neon lights of Las Vegas lingered in my mind long after we left, their garish glow a fitting backdrop for the chaos I'd let consume me. Clara and I returned to our routine: meetings, contracts, the polished veneer of professionalism. But the undercurrent of our secret pulsed stronger than ever. Each touch, each stolen moment, was a defiance of the boundaries we'd long since shattered. I told myself I could live with the guilt, that the thrill of her was worth the cost, but the truth was creeping closer, a shadow I could no longer ignore. I was unraveling, and I knew it. Worse, I could see it in Clara too. Her smiles tighter, her silences heavier, as if she felt the same dread coiling around us. In Houston, it reached a fever pitch. We'd spent the day in a grueling negotiation, and by evening, the tension between us was unbearable. Dinner with the team was a blur of forced laughter and clinking glasses, but all I could think about was her, the way her dress clung to her curves, the way her eyes flicked to mine when no one was looking. When the others left, we stayed, the restaurant emptying around us. "Let's go," she said, her voice low, and I followed her without question, my pulse racing. In her room, we didn't bother with pretense. Her hands were on me before the door closed, her kiss a collision of need and despair. We stumbled to the bed, our bodies moving with a rhythm that was both familiar and frantic, as if we were trying to outrun the inevitable. Her skin was fire under my touch, her breath a ragged melody that pulled me under. I traced the lines of her body, each curve a confession, each sigh a plea. We were reckless, unmoored, our connection a storm that left us both breathless and broken. Afterward, she didn't pull away, but she didn't speak either. She lay beside me, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and I felt the weight of her silence like a physical thing. "Clara," I started, but she shook her head, her fingers tightening on mine. "Don't," she whispered. "Not tonight." I wanted to push, to ask what we were doing to ourselves, but I couldn't. Instead, I held her, my heart pounding with the fear of what came next. The tipping point came in Los Angeles, a city that felt like it was holding its breath. We were nearing the end of the trip, the final meetings looming, and the pressure was suffocating. I'd started noticing things, whispers among the team, glances that lingered too long. Paranoia, I told myself, but the fear was real. That night, after a late dinner, Clara and I ended up in her suite again. The air was heavy, the silence between us charged with something new, something dangerous. She poured us wine, her movements slow, deliberate, but when she looked at me, her eyes were haunted. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "what if someone knows?" The question hit me like a blade. I wanted to reassure her, to say we'd been careful, but the truth was, we hadn't. Not really. The thought of our secret spilling out, of her husband finding out, of my career imploding, made my chest tighten. "No one knows," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. She stepped closer, her hand resting on my chest, and then she kissed me, soft at first, then desperate, as if she could drown the fear in me. I pulled her close, my hands sliding under her shirt, her skin searing against mine. We moved together, a dance of need and defiance, our bodies speaking what our words couldn't. Her breath was hot against my neck, her fingers digging into my back, and for a moment I could pretend we were untouchable. But the fear lingered, a shadow that followed us even in the heat of it all. The next morning, everything changed. We were in a meeting, Clara presenting with her usual poise, when I noticed her phone buzzing on the table. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. She excused herself, her voice steady, but her hands shaking, and I felt a cold dread settle in my gut. When she returned, she didn't look at me, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped her pen. Later, in the hallway, she pulled me aside, her voice low. "My husband called," she said, her eyes searching mine. "He's flying out to meet me tomorrow." The words were a punch, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "Does he?" I started, but she cut me off. "I don't know," she said, "but we need to stop Ethan. Now." I wanted to argue, to beg her to reconsider, but the look in her eyes silenced me. She was scared, and so was I. That night, I lay awake in my own room. The first time in weeks I hadn't been with her. The emptiness was crushing, but so was the relief. Maybe this was my chance to walk away, to salvage what was left of my conscience. But the thought of losing her, of going back to the hollow life I'd known before, tore at me. I was addicted to her, to the way she made me feel, and the idea of letting that go was unbearable. The next day, her husband arrived. I saw them in the hotel lobby, his arm around her waist, her smile tight but convincing. She introduced me as her associate, her voice steady, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. He was older, kind-looking, oblivious to the betrayal standing right in front of him. I shook his hand, my stomach churning, and excused myself as quickly as I could. That night, I drank alone, the weight of my choices suffocating me. I wanted to hate her, to hate myself, but all I felt was loss. When we returned to the office, Clara and I barely spoke. She was distant, professional, and I followed her lead, burying myself in work to avoid the truth. But late one night, as I was leaving, she called me into her office. The door closed, and for a moment, we just stood there, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen." I wanted to touch her, to pull her close, but I didn't. "Me neither," I said, and it was the truth. I walked away that night, knowing I'd never be the same. The secret was still ours, but it had cost us everything: her marriage, my integrity, the fragile illusion of who we thought we were. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but I know I'll never forget her. She was my ruin, my salvation, and the mirror I could never look away from.